Hello everyone. Welcome to our very first session of Hello MECA Practical Employment Law Solutions. To our MECA members, hope you all have been safe during this COVID pandemic. To new viewers, welcome. I hope you will all find this to be insightful, entertaining, and illuminating. Before we get on with our topic today, let me just introduce myself. My name is Dzulfadhli Lamin, and I am one of the legal consultants here at MECA. For those hearing MECA for the first time, MECA is a boutique industrial relations consulting based in Petaling Jaya. We have been established since 1996 and 24 years and counting. We have spread our wings to the southern and northern region for the past 5 years. And with that, we have been successful in assisting more than 1,000 employers in HR-related issues. Now, we are more than happy to proudly present to the viewers and to the public our very own webinar series. This webinar series is something that we intend to be a brief crash course joined with subject matter experts, where we believe in providing practical understanding and practical approach for employers and HR practitioners out there. These bi-weekly webinars, will be on every Tuesday and Thursday, with each session tailored to discuss pressing HR issues and available HR options for employers. And in each session, we will invite lawyers and consultants as guests to dissect the HR-related issues. Now, none of all this will be possible without our proud partners, Elabram Systems. Elabram System is one of the best HR solutions provider in Asia Pacific. They provide innovative HR solutions and workforce management systems. Among other services that they provide are executive search and staffing, workforce management systems, and telco solutions. So if you viewers are interested in any of those services, feel free to visit them at elabram.com, elabram.com. And together with our partner, we will provide freebies for our viewers today. And we Malaysian, we love free stuff. So stick around to find out more on our exciting freebies at the end of this session. Now let's straight on to our topic today. We have seen endless HR-related questions being raised throughout this pandemic. What more with the fourth phase of MCO coming upon us? And the main questions being raised, as we can see in social media such as Facebook, Twitter, Telegram, they are mostly coined around the idea of companies conducting cost-cutting measurements. So among the questions are, can the companies do a pay cut? Can the companies put employees on annual leave? Can the companies ask the people to use unpaid leave, to go on unpaid leave? Now, among all of these questions, what we'll be discussing in our first session today is a more primary question, a question of consent. Now, why I say it's more primary, because on top of all of the cost-cutting measurements, consent is very important. Now, joining me today, I have two very well-versed industrial relation lawyers from Dharmen Sivalingam and Partners. The managing partner of Dharmen Sivalingam and Partners himself, the well-respected Mr. Dharmen.
Hey, hi Zul. Hello everyone.
Hi, good to have you here. And joining us today is DSP's legal associate, Miss Lina.
Hi Zul, and good evening everybody.
Hi Lina. Great to have you both here. Now, to all the viewers, Mr. Dharmen, Miss Lina, and myself have years of experience in this field, and all of the advices and discussions that we're going to have today will reflect the same. Now, for Miss Lina and Mr. Dharmen, as practicing lawyers, they have the experience for representing numerous clients in industrial relation court. Therefore, they will be sharing opinions from experience. They can share to you what holds up in court, and they can share to you what is the IR chairman looking for whenever a case reaches the IR court. So just to kick things off, Lina and Sadaman, I've mentioned to our viewers about the pressing HR issue, which is cost-cutting measurement. However, I would like to highlight and discuss on another primary question, which is consent. Why is consent so important in this case?
Okay, so maybe I'll go first.
Yeah, sure, please.
Okay, to understand the importance of consent, Zol, we have to go back to the fundamental elements of the contract, in this case, the employment contract. Okay, so before the employee signs the contract, they would have read the terms and conditions of it. So basically, when it's signed, the employer and the employee have mutually agreed to this contract, right?
Yeah.
So when you're going to make any variations to this employment contract, um, ideally it should be agreed by both parties. In the event, if let's say the employer decides to change the terms of the contract, maybe the salary or the benefits or working hours and whatnot, if they do that without the consent of the employee, that would be unilateral variation of the contract, which could possibly lead to a fundamental breach of contract. So at this point, right now, all the employees are trying to salvage their business, and that is why they are carrying out all these cost-cutting measures, whether it's pay cut or reduction of benefits and other measures.
Yeah.
So when they have this idea to protect their business, in executing it, emphasis should also be made, because you don't want to come out from one problem and then get into another. So when I'm saying getting into another, is you don't want to face litigation risk, because once all this is over, once the MCO period is over, you want to focus on how to build your business, not to go to court and so on. So that's why consent becomes important here.
All right.
Zul, if I can chime in.
Yeah.
See, Lina's point is very, very accurate now. From a contractual standpoint, contract of employment is an individual contract, and the terms were agreed by both the employer and employee, and the terms were accepted by way of sign off, and the contract has already been performed for many, many months. So let's talk about outside the MCO, because I think we all can probably expect the MCO to be removed at some point. And if the employer wants to continue with such measures like all the things you talked about, asking employees to go on annual leave, putting employees on unpaid leave, reducing salaries, whether it's with a corresponding reducing hours or without, all of this would require the consent of the employees, because, as Lina mentioned, the terms that were agreed upon earlier, let's just talk about salary cut situation. So the salary between Mr. A and his employer was stated 3,000 ringgit in the contract. If we want to bring that down to say 2,500 ringgit, there needs to be a variation to that contract. That variation should be by way of consent. But as later on we'll be talking about the practical aspects, I think that's one major challenge that employers have. Especially the smaller employers who may not have the cash reserves, they have to do all of this really fast. Trying to
I
get
agree.
consent in all this short time, it's not an easy conversation to have, right?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to happily agree to a reduction in terms and conditions. But we'll delve into that a bit more deep as you start asking more questions on that.
So just to briefly sum up, consent here is very important because it enables employers to proceed with any variation of terms and conditions in the contract. Am I right?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. Now, on top of that, since consent is also a voluntarily thing, so how do you show that the consent given by the employees are actually genuine? Because nowadays, in desperate times where time is not of the essence, time is of the essence, everything is in a rush. To survive in the business, to survive in the market, things need to go quickly. So how do you prove that the consent taken from the employees are actually genuine?
That's actually a very excellent question, Zul, because that's what we actually face at court. I give you a scenario, the worst case scenario, right? Always, somehow, the employer would have obtained the consent from the employee, and they think they are safe, they've done the right thing. And then when it go and few months down the road, they'll be getting a claim from the industrial court because the employee has walked out of constructive dismissal, saying that he was forced to give the consent on the reduction of maybe salary, for instance.
Yeah.
So then the company's position will be that I have already given my consent, right? So I mean, I've already taken the consent of the employee. So why am I still in trouble? That's the thinking of the company. But what we can defend here is to show how that to show to the court that the consent was actually genuine. The other side will say that I was being forced here. I was under duress. I was under undue influence.
Yeah.
So, based on the cases that we have faced in this kind of situation and also reading the decisions of the court, we realize that the court tends to scrutinize into the company's action at that particular moment when the consent was obtained. So, for an
Mm.
example, usually this in before MCO period, this would have been done in a room concept maybe, where they're in a room and then they would say that you have to get the consent right now immediately. You before if they want to suggest a salary reduction, they will say please let us know whether you are agreeable to this, and they will not allow that person to go to the room. So if you do such a thing, then they will say you are forcing them. If I want to give a scenario in relation to the MCO period now, um, maybe you're having a video call and you say that no, you have to tell me the answer now. You get recording this video and you're telling you have to give me your answer right now without giving them time to think about it, or letting them to consult anybody about it. So that's when the issue will come, whether it's actually genuine or not. The way to
Mm.
tackle this is to show that you're giving time to that person to think about your suggestion. So, for instance, what you can do is maybe at least give a day. I would suggest at least 2 or 3 days, but I understand for some business it will be a pressing issue. So maybe at least a day for them to think about it, and it will not be looking good for you also. For instance, if you're going to record this consent, and then during the video the guy says that I want to consult somebody, and you say no, you have to give me the answer right now, even though you might do it in your most sweetest voice, but still when you're not allowing them to that freedom to consult somebody, you are sort of forcing them. So
I
that's
see.
when you can prove your genuineness.
I see. So it's very subjective, and it's up to the HR practitioners to be creative in getting the consent. Am I right?
Yes, precisely.
If I can add on a little bit, so I think that's such an important aspect. It may not be the HR practitioner; it could be the leader, the CEO themselves.
Mm.
Typically, I think when you're carrying a very difficult message like this, the leadership needs to carry that message. But I would also like to add on, and Dina, it's funny you said when the guy is trying to give the consent, so you're trying to suggest that the female manager is putting pressure, like now you have to give consent. Clearly, Dina has touched on some cases where consent has been held to be involuntary because of those kind of things, right? With force. But I'd like to go a little bit outside of just the law. So this is where the communication skills become really, really important. You need to understand you can't go out there and say, okay, hello, I'm going to cut your salary by 20%, agree or not. You get what I'm saying? You got to have your script, your narrative. And of course, I would like to trust that the employer is doing it because the financials are forcing him to do it. There are some guiding principles that I really would urge all employees to take into account, such as number one, don't go into a pay cut if you can take other measures to reduce costs, which doesn't impact employees. Number two, be very clear about how you're going to communicate. There's so many things you've got to think about. Everybody, the larger you are, management has to be aligned. And then really, so ultimately, the trick, I wouldn't use the trick, the sauce, magic sauce is in when the leadership positions the need to get consent in such a way that the employee feels, I have to give this consent. It is the right thing to do. It is the only thing, right? So now, that unfortunately is a function of how the climate in the company is. Does the employer have high levels of trust? There's the leadership. Have they led well during the good time? I also would like to suggest the leaders need to take a bigger hit. They should take a hit first before you go down to the employees. Another point that helps you win the heart and mind of the employee, when you go up and say, "Hey guys, I've already taken a hit for 2 months. It's not enough, and I've taken a big hit. I'm not intending to have that kind of percentage for all of you. But this is what I'm trying to say. Build up the narrative that magic sauce is in how you manage the employees' perception and understanding and reasonableness.
I see. So I agree with you, Mr. Dharmen. Whenever it starts from the top, if the leadership itself shows with path the whole way through for everyone, it's much easier for the employees to follow. So that's a good point where I believe most and which most companies should adapt in this time. Now moving on with that question, Mr. Dharmen. Let's say if my company has a script, a very well versed script for me to communicate about the consent, about to ask the consent. In that situation, let's say if I have 500 employees, must I get all 500 to sign the consent?
Okay, now Lina will tell you that if you are in court and one of them didn't sign, you have a problem, right? Okay, so there are some other considerations. So I guess I would start by saying that is the best practice, right? Now, is it realistic that we're going to get all 500 employees to sign off? Probably a bit naive to think that. But here's what I would do. What I would do is, again, number one, you take into account the guiding principles I talked about. Please, if an employer is making money, don't do all of these things. If the employer can survive without cutting salary, don't do it. Do it when you have the business has to sustain itself, right? So the financials need to be there. All of that has to be genuine, right? So then, when I have large employee in a headcount, I'm going to say, guys, um, if I don't do this, if we don't do this, it is likely the company is going to tutup kedai, close shop, and I can't let that happen. I need to do something now. What is that something? I've thought about all the various cost-cutting measures. I've looked at all the subsidies, but I can't run away from having to do this. And I'll flash my figures, show all that, be transparent as far as possible. And then I will say, now I do understand that not all of you might be agreeable to this, but because this is a decision for the larger good of everyone, I'm setting up a rule where if we have a majority, let's say 75% who agree to this, I am going to push this through, right? So that's one aspect I would set up those rules. Now I'll come back to whether 75% is reasonable or not. Number two, let's say we run that, and let's say I've got 85% who say yes, 10% who didn't vote, and 5% who say no. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go back to the 10% first. I'll go back to them and say, hey guys, why didn't you all vote? I will explain to them. I'll explain to them, do you not understand this? Can I try and get you to agree? I might also, at the same time, open up perhaps to all the 10 and the 5 who voted against to say, guys, can I understand what's making it difficult for you to consent? Is the pay cut I'm suggesting, let's say 25% too high for you? Come up with a bespoke solution. Let's say the guy says, yes, boss, I can only go with 15% pay cut because of my commitment. Okay, I understand. My pay cut, which was supposed to be for 3 months, for you, I will make it 10% pay cut, but we do it for a longer period of 6 months. Everybody else, 3 months. So you're creating less and less barriers for an employee to give the consent. You're pivoting, you're turning it to the employee to say, hey, come on, man, I'm going all the way. And the other 80% has said this. And I'd like to add that this is demonstrated in the industrial court. The industrial court being a court of equity and conscience. An employer will win some point the fact that they did it in this way. It's very bona fide in my opinion.
If I can add on to that, Zul,
Yeah.
basically, it would be an ideal situation if we get all, for instance, did you say 500 employees here, right?
Yeah.
We get 500, all 500 employees, yes, that'll be great. And it's possible if it's a small company with maybe 100 people, then yes, you are able to get that. But with bigger companies, it's a bit difficult because the thing is they will not see the cash flow of the company. Only the top management people and the finance people will know the cash flow of of the company at the moment. The rest of the employees, they'll be like, hey, we got a big project already, so I think that should be able to sustain us for next 2 months, and it's only been 6 weeks of MCO. But they wouldn't know that one project will not be able to sustain the business, right? So like what Mr. Dharma has said, that you got to project all these financial figures and facts to them, and explain to them in detail. And at least you might be able to get 70% of them agreeing and consenting to you. And then after that, again, go back to the 30% and convince them again. And let's say if this goes to court, and I know I always go back to court, but I would like to just give you all the whole idea. If at all it goes to court, and you can always tell to the 20% who went to court, you can always tell to the court that it was not voluntarily, it was not done intentionally or in bad intention. It was we had the financial crisis going on, and we did approach to them and explain to them the situation. Everything was black and white, and 80% of them actually agreed to it. And the only reason for doing this is to actually, for instance, if they actually chose salary reduction, the only reason they chose this is because they want to keep the employees in continued employment. So there you go, you have a bona fide intention, bona fide meaning good faith intention here.
I see.
Right? So you are able to show all this to court, and like what Mr. Dharmen has said, that industrial court is a court of good equity and is equity and good conscience, right? So it works for both employees and employers. So they will I don't see why it won't be in favor of the company in this kind of situation.
I see. So just on that point, Lina and Mr. Dharmen, you both mentioned that the industrial court is an equity and of good conscience. Now, to our viewers out there who is still, I think, confused between what's the difference between a civil court and what's the difference between an IR court, and if let's say this matter of people not giving consent but the company still proceed, what is the weight that the IR court will look into? I mean, is that what's the rate of success for these employers to show that, for instance, my company have to do this or not, we will go down, or not financially will not be sustainable. So how does that? What's the weight they have in IR court? What's the difference with the civil court?
Okay, let me maybe if I have a start on that. See, the industrial court is a court that needs to take into account the industrial harmony. It's not a sort of in fact, there are provisions in the Industrial Relations Act states the court does not take into account technicalities, right? And the court has a role to play as part of it. The court was given birth through the Industrial Relations Act. The Industrial Relations Act is an act which is to look overall industrial harmony. It makes reference to the Code of Conduct for Industrial Harmony, which talks about keeping retrenchment as the last resort. So a salary cut, annual leave, unpaid leave, if it's being done in order to minimize or avoid retrenchments, one would argue that that is good industrial practice. And to answer your question, would the court give weightage to that? Yes, I think they would. Would the court give weightage to the reality of the financial? I think it's a very important consideration. And as like Lina said, sharing that information. See, if you have got evidence that you had a PowerPoint deck that you showed to staff, and you now can provide this to court, and it's going to happen 12 months later, 15 months later, you just stand in a much better position to try and convince the court that I was doing what is fair. So in my opinion, you will get a lot more mileage in the industrial court to try and show good conscience, good behavior, best practices by the employer. You will get more mileage in the industrial court compared to a civil court. Right? The civil court is more likely, but those are the terms. The guy didn't agree. You cannot vary, right?
I see. Okay, that's a good point.
I agree with what Mr. Dharmen said. It's just basically in civil court, it's just direct to the point whether there's a breach or there's no breach. But in industrial court, there's more to it. They will go beyond the technicalities of the legal technicalities. They will see on the fairness, whether the company has acted fairly in carrying out their cost-cutting measures.
I see. Okay, I think so far at this point we are clear that what consent is, what's the purpose of consent, and what are the risks of people initiating exercises without 100% consent. And also, I think to this point, our viewers understand that, and correct me if I'm wrong, the industrial court does not dictate on how you operate your business, but it will look into the fairness, reasonableness, and good faith of the action. Am I correct?
Yeah, precisely.
Okay, great. Now,
then
yes. Sorry?
10 out of 10 marks for that.
Thank you very much, Tom. Okay, now let's move on to another question. Let's say if the employers or our viewers as an employer knows that they have to get consent, they have planned how to get consent, but can you put it in a way of a step-by-step procedure, the best method to get this consent without going through any hassle? Is there a procedural step that you can share?
Okay, can I jump in here? And because to me this is not a hard legal question. This is the part employment law and human resource. You have that human element. So the human element, the human interaction requires a level of practicality that is beyond the law. So I'd start by saying, again, I go back to the guiding principles. These things must be done for the right reason, right? Employers who can afford or who are doing well shouldn't try to take advantage of MCO and the economy and try and do this kind of stuff, right? So number one, I would say employers need to be clear about the financials, identify the pay cut rate that is workable and reasonable. You can't go for a pay cut of 95%, lah, right? So these are things I want to sort of put out there. Yeah, number two, you need to file your borang PK 1 month before you do this exercise. You need to file that with the Labour Department. Number three, you got to communicate effectively. Number four, obtain the consent. Number five, issue the letter with the salary cut stating when is the effective date. Now, again, challenge here is how do you do this right? How do you do this right in a very strict or constrained timeline? To me, what you want to do is get advice. It's not easy to do this. I'm sure MECA members are reaching out to all the consultants, including you, though. I'm sure you guys are giving them templates, giving them advice, helping them how to execute. I think if you're not a member, you should think about doing this. And I believe you're having some offer later today, right? You should think about that because I believe that the experience. I mean, I think about it when I talk about what I just talked about earlier, even what Dina talked about. A lot of it is coming from experience. It's not just the law. So that experience that you have, if someone advises you with that experience, I think it's going to help a lot of people to do this because that's the challenge. You're trying to do so much, so fast, and it involves a hard conversation with employees because consent is necessary.
Understood. I mean, I agree with you. The law is the same, and if there's any changes, it takes years and years and years for the change. However, the application and the implication of the law is up to the person using it. Like for
Yeah.
instance, in this case, for us, how do we get consent? How do we communicate to the employees to get the consent? So, okay, I think that's very clear for our viewers. And to
I
the
think
viewers, yes, yes,
no, I
Lina.
think adding on to one of the point Mr. Dharmen had said, one of the steps is the communicating effectively. I think that's something which is always often forgotten, but it's even though it's not part of the legal principles or anything, but actually is looked into very detailedly by court as well, because how you present your communication shows whether you've acted fairly with the employees. uh, there could be, maybe right now it'd be difficult for you to, if you want to do a pay cut, you might think, how am I going to explain that to the fellow employees across the board? So you can think creative ideas, like probably have a virtual town hall session with them. And I think all these strategies are something, like Mr. Dharmen said, within the expertise of MECA. So there are numerous ways to carry out all of this communication strategies.
I agree. Couldn't agree more with you. And I just want to add a bit to what we have been discussing, because a lot of employers are asking, why must we ask the consent? I mean, we are the employers. I mean, we direct our employees how to work, where to work, we pay them. So why do we have to ask them now? So I just want to make sure all of all of our viewers understand, and to make it very clear that each contract of employment with an employee is individually negotiated, and therefore, like what Lina mentioned earlier, consent is needed if a variation were to happen. So for the viewers out there, That's the reason why we believe consent is a more primary question before we proceed to cost reduction measures. Now,
Zul,
yes,
can I add something, Zul? I need to uh, give a level of practicality as well. You see,
yeah,
I actually know of some employers who have already done some of these measures and they don't have a consent clause.
hmm,
They have not got any the employee to sign off. Okay, so the point I want to drive is that an issue? Number one, if the employee doesn't go and complain, and if it doesn't go to court, that are issue lah, right? But if the employee goes and complains, and you don't have control over that, right? That
yeah,
is
Yeah.
how the communication is. If the employee goes and complains, and let's say all we have is a letter from an employer saying that, as discussed, your salary will be reduced by 25% effective 1st May 2020. Thank you very much, right? And the guy is going to say, oh, this can't be done. And so that's where it becomes a big issue. So I guess what I'm trying to say is some employers didn't have the luxury of time to do this in the right way. But for those who are in the planning mode, please do it right. I think what Ina talked about is so important. When the economy turns around, when the situation starts getting normal, you want to be putting all your effort towards driving your business back up. You don't want to be running through courts. I mean, it's not fun. You're hanging about in courts. You have to prepare for, and it's a lot of negative energy. So you've got to make sure you do it right.
yes. And I also understand that if somebody were to complain today, it will take them at least 1 year plus to see the employers in court. Am I right in that situation?
Industrial court, yeah, you're probably, and now, there's going to be a crazy backlog. The industrial courts are closed, and can you imagine the volume of cases? So honestly, I don't think the timelines that we are used to might remain true after the MCO has been lifted because courts are going to be, I think they're going to be overloaded with work.
Exactly. So I think you would want to, they might want to consider to spend and invest your time right now in getting the
Mm.
message across right and doing the right way, and rather than having a mess later on, you can just uh, focus on your business later.
And maybe one last point is employees also kena munasabah lah. If times are really bad, yeah. You see, I want to just say this. We know that for 6 months there is a moratorium on housing loan, car loan,
Yes.
maybe pun ada discount. I think Wi-Fi also got some, internet also got some discount. So it is fair to say that an employee, sorry, who has got this kind of loan for 6 months, their financial requirement has come down. So, as the PM said, the bending bahu and all of that. So it's for the right reason. You have the 6 months where you're not going to spend this amount for the survivability of the company, for the welfare of all employees. Really, this is about trying to keep as many people in employment as possible. So I think that's an important point.
Yeah, I agree. Even I receive calls on a daily basis, and I know for sure that people are worried to lose their job, and nobody wants to be unemployed. At the same time, employers would want to make sure the business continues for the next few months. So all in all, I would like to highlight to the viewers the point Mr. Dharmen and Lina shared on communication or effective communication is very important. You got to make sure that the employers and employees are on the same page. So any exercises, the employees can easily consent and the employers can easily move forward with the business. All right, I think that's a good take. Um, those are the questions I have from my end. However, I'm gonna allow the viewers today to ask questions if you guys don't mind. Right? But before I move on to the question, allow me to share an interesting thing I promised earlier in the session, which are the freebies. Okay. Uh, Elabram here proudly present you a free trial of their workforce management system, WMS. And the free trial lasts until 31st May. WMS is an excellent digital transformation system. It enables you to record staff's attendance, for you to clock in working hours anytime, anywhere. So in this pandemic, where most companies have adapted to working from home, I believe that this is a very interesting and helpful application for our viewers. So feel free to look into Elabram WMS at wms.elabram.com. Now, apart from that, Mr. Dharmen has mentioned that our members enjoy benefits of getting templates, free templates and advisors. Now, starting with this webinar, we would like to promote a free trial of 14 days to non-members to enjoy whatever other MECA members have been enjoying throughout this period. You can drop in your info and details at admin@meca.com.my. Now, with that, let me move on to the questions I have from the floor. Question number 1. If consent received, but a day after the employee pulled back, how? How?
Looks like the employee is more confused than the employer, man. No. Lina, what are your thoughts? Maybe you go first.
You see, so when he's retracting his consent back, I think it's best for you to go back and speak to him and understand why he's acting that way. Maybe he has some concerns that's not clarified, and maybe I think this point has been pointed out by Mr. Dharmen earlier. Maybe his appetite is probably if he's supposed to have a 20% pay cut, he just realized, oh no, I can't run my family with 20% pay cut. I only can run my family with 15% pay cut, so I better not agree to this. And that's why he just withdraw his consent. So if you address those concerns and you go and speak to him and say, maybe we can work around this, and then you try to say maybe for others we'll have 20% pay cut for 6 months, and probably for you 15% pay cut for 9 months. So it all comes about the same value. So that way he might then agree again. So yeah, that's my thoughts on it.
I would go with, I would certainly not proceed in respect of this employee, because the issue of, can you imagine if you're in court and the question is, did he voluntarily give consent? What do you think a judge is going to say? Because the last action of the employee was to pull back. If I'm the judge, I'm going to think he probably didn't give it voluntarily. So go back in, have further intervention, speak to the employee, try to understand the concern, and hopefully you can come to an understanding that's workable.
Okay, so it falls back to the employee and the employee's discussion on why the consent was taken away and find a leeway to settle the issue.
I want to add one point. There was a interesting sort of a notion that was shared, and this is when the employer goes out to try and get the consent, and for the employees who don't give the consent, right? So in that case, what the employer did was, for the employees who gave consent, he proceeded to have salary reduction. For the employees who didn't give consent, in the letter, he says your salary will remain. However, in the event that you proceed to have a retrenchment, this may be a consideration that we will take into account, right? So, a couple of problems there. First problem that I have is, I think it's unfair if a large majority of employees agreed to the salary reduction, and the company proceeded. Let's say 85% agreed. So the company agreed. The company proceeded 85% get a 20% salary cut. The balance 15%, who in my opinion looks like they are quite unreasonable, they get rewarded with no salary cut. So I have that one issue about the internal inequity, right? The guys who consented may think, why did I go to consent? Looks like I would have voted if I didn't give consent. That's number one. Number two, can we then use it? Let's say if 3 months later there's a retrenchment and the company says, okay, all the 15% who didn't give me consent, I am gonna let you go first. Okay. I don't think it gives you a get out of jail card, because you still have to go through the law on retrenchment, that specifically the reorganization, the job was redundant. Now, however, I think where this can be helpful is, let's say the guy who consented and the guy who didn't consent are both occupying the same job. Let's call it finance clerk. And now moving forward, I'm only going to keep one finance clerk. It's an interesting point. I think that in that selection process, I will reward the employee who consented even though they may have less years of service. So I'm suggesting that this might be a workaround for LIPO. Interesting point. But like I said, the internal inequity, susah lah. The 85% who agree, they dapat pay cut. The 15% didn't agree, dah dapat pay cut. You got to balance that out.
All right.
Also, I think when you said the 15% of them, when they get a pay cut, when they don't get a pay cut and they might face retrenchment, it feels like an unfair selection criteria also there. So I don't know how the court is going to view about it, whether it's fair or not.
Yeah.
To be wary of the options you give to the employees, right?
I agree. It shouldn't be like automatically the 15% I'm going to retrench. You still have to go through, the position must be redundant. Now, if there is a selection, whether you can use this as a ground for selection, nice question. Maybe a judge will have to answer that at some point.
Okay, fair enough. Very clear on that. Let's move on to the second question. Can employers still seek employees' consent for pay cut after getting wage subsidy from government? What will be the consequence? I think here means the WSP program, wage subsidy program.
Yep.
So what are your thoughts?
Well, this is actually quite clear. The wage subsidy says, in respect of the employees that you applied for the wage subsidy, right? So that's an important consideration. Let's say I got 10 employees.
Mm.
I apply for wage subsidy for 5 and not for another 5. Maybe because the other 5 are more than 4,000. So remember, the wage subsidy is only for 4,000 and below.
Yeah.
So for the 5 that I successfully get the wage subsidy, for these 5, 3 plus 3, 6 months in total, I cannot have a pay cut, I cannot have a retrenchment of them and so on. But at the same time, I might be having a pay cut for the other 5 that I didn't apply. You understand? The rule is, if you applied for the wage subsidy and got it, then you cannot do a pay cut for 6 months from the time you got your approval. But you can't do it only in respect of the employees that you applied wage subsidy for. You can still do a retrenchment at the same time, but for employees who are not under your wage subsidy list.
So in other words, a company can still go through with other cost reduction measurements, but not for those who have been applied and approved for wage subsidy. So in other words, those under wage subsidy program are untouchable or invincible for the next 6 months. Am I right?
Yeah.
That's a way to put it.
Okay, great. Now move on to the next question. If there is still minority who decides not to give consent despite we had tried to convince them and open for nego, does that mean we have to exempt these people from the measure?
I think this is something Mr. Dharmen just addressed.
Yeah.
It would be unfair for only the 80% to go through pay cut and the 15% to not go through the pay cut.
Yeah, I think it's very clear that you don't have different sets of rules and different sets of portions and options for people just because the reason why they refuse.
And let me just play this out, Zul, right? Let's just play this out. So let's say 3 out of the 15% actually file the complaint. Okay, because 15% who say no consent, but finally when the company implements, they may still think, yeah, never mind lah, I don't want to take an action lah, right? So to me, that is considered consent lah, right? Okay? But there might be some, because as you mentioned, people don't want to lose their jobs. So imagine you are now in a situation where you're taking action against the employer. Let me just play that out. How do you take action? If the employee is earning up to 5,000 ringgit, they can file a complaint with the Labour Department, right? If the employee is earning more than 5,000, they have to go to the civil court. Now, if the employee let me say that right. For this method, what the employee is trying to claim is, the employee is saying, you can't cut my salary, and if you have already cut my salary without my consent, I want that salary to be paid back to you. So they remain in employment, but they bring an action with the Labour Court or the civil court. Yeah? Okay. So how will that play out? What will the Labour Court decide? Now, to me, I would like to think that the Labour Department also needs to have some level of fairness in their decision-making process. if we've done what we talked about, i.e., the financials are very real, are true, the company has taken all other cost-cutting measures, the senior management have taken big cuts, and managers have taken a bigger cut, and now say 85%, 90% of employees have agreed to this. These three guys, to me, seems to be unreasonable, and I'd like to think that the JTK might view it that way, and not just purely from a legal angle. Because while the JTK doesn't come under the Industrial Relations Act, it still comes under the Ministry of Human Resource, and to me, the Ministry of Human Resource should be looking at industrial harmony, bigger picture stuff, right? But more interestingly, for those who decide to go the other route, as Lina talked about just now, constructive dismissal. So
Mm.
let's say the employee says, hey, I didn't consent to this, but still you push it through. I am going to walk off my job and claim constructive dismissal. Firstly, in this scenario, I don't think people want to do that. A job with 80% salary is better than zero job, right?
Yeah.
So, but anyway, let's say maybe this guy, very rich guy, he says, I don't care, you can't do this. And if
Yeah.
he files, and if it goes to the industrial court, constructive dismissal, the burden of proof is on the employee. That's one thing that we need to understand. And number two, all the points that Lina and I spoke about, the industrial court being a court of equity, good conscience. If we can show and demonstrate the communications, the financials, the fact that we went back after the first round, tried to convince them, tried to have this spoke approach. Okay, if you cannot agree 20%, what about 10% for 6 months instead of 20% 3 months? After doing all of that, I mean, Zul, I put it to you, if you are the judge, do you think that this exercise, which is in view of the entire organization better for all, would you decide that this is unfair dismissal? I
I
wouldn't.
would say no. Yeah. It's reasonable enough for the company to proceed. So on that point, Sadaman, is it fair to say that for employees to complain at our department, they must first walk off out of their employment?
Yep.
Okay.
Because
All right.
if you go to IR, you are seeking reinstatement, which means you must have lost your job before you can go there.
So if an employee who does not agree in giving the consent, and he goes on Facebook as a keyboard warrior saying this and that about the company, but he did not go to the IR court, nor did he go to the labor department. That means the employer is not facing any potential legal risk, right? However, the employee may face potential risk for
There's
defaming the company.
separate disciplinary issues that we're looking at.
Okay, that's on a different topic. Now we go on to the last question we have today, because since we have limited time. For unionized staff, if the union does not agree to salary cut, but the staff himself has provided to a salary cut, can the company still proceed?
Fantastic question. In fact,
Mm.
I didn't qualify my answers just now when I said I was the answer of going to court. I was only referring to non-unionized situation. So union situation. First things first, the union has the power to represent the workers, right? So if the union doesn't agree and the employee agrees, it doesn't mean that the company can proceed to just do that legally. It doesn't mean that the company has the right to do that, right? This is an exception to the individual. The contract of employment is an individual right, because once there's recognition of a union, the union has the right to represent employees on terms and conditions. Yeah.
Mm.
So the answer there is a little bit more technical. So I hope I can articulate myself clearly enough to get this point across. What would happen, in my opinion, would be if the company proceeds to impose the salary cut despite the disagreement of the union. What will then happen should be the union files a complaint of non-compliance under Section 56 of the Industrial Relations Act. What does that mean? So the union says, hey, Mr. Employer, we have got an agreement, a collective agreement that has been signed between the union and yourself. This collective agreement has obtained the cognizance of the industrial court. And in this collective agreement, for this level of employee, you are supposed to pay 1,500. Now, by imposing your pay cut, you're paying 1,350. It is in breach, or it is not complying with this collective agreement that has been signed and received cognizance. So when that happens, the employer has an opportunity to put up a a claim of, or rather a defense of special circumstances. What do I mean by that? The employer says, you see, the employer cannot come and say, no, no, I didn't, there is no non-compliance. I have been complying. Tak boleh lah, because if you potong gaji, memang you're not complying. So you got to say, guilty, I'm not complying. However, Yang Arif, Section 56 sub 2 of the Industrial Relations Act says, where there are special circumstances, the industrial court may intervene and vary the award. So it is my opinion that if the company has got the financials, done all of what I said before, and entered into dialogue with the union, tried their best to get the union agreement, and based on this question, if they have got evidence that the employee is agreeable, it shows that the union was not so reasonable. And in court, you can, in my opinion, have a chance of showing that there are special circumstances in today's day and age. COVID, world economy. I don't know how long the MCO is going to be. Putting all of this together and having done it in the best way with consultation, and you have some other employees, non-unionized, have given their agreement, so you've implemented for non-unionized employees. I think collectively there are special circumstances that a court may agree and accept to allow the collective agreement to be varied.
I think there's more to discuss when it comes to union, Mr. Dharmen, because I believe that what you mentioned, the collective agreement goes a long way when it comes to court. So for us to discuss that in depth, I would like to invite our current viewers to tune in to one of our sessions, most probably next week, where we indulge in the issue of unionized employees. Now, I think that's all the questions we have from the viewers. I'm very sorry for the viewers who have posed questions and are not answered here, but don't be worried. We will try our best to answer each and every question that has been posted via our email. And if there are any interesting questions that we believe would like to be shared to the public, we will bring that question into the next session. So please feel free to drop in your questions at our email. And our next session will be this coming Thursday on 30th of April, where we will discuss on the exit strategies. Now, this discussion is a continuance from where we are right now. At this point, we are discussing on cost measurements or cost-cutting measurements and consents. If you have passed that level and your company still needs to find ways to sustain your business, you might have to go through, like what Mr. Dharmen said, the last option in the industrial code, which is retrenchment. Now, in our next session, we will dissect what is retrenchment, what is VSS, and what is MSS. So with that, Mr. Dharmen, Ms. Lina, thank you very much for joining us today. I believe our viewers can take practical approach with your advices and discussions. And for Elabram HR Solutions, thank you for bringing us together in this forum, in this session. And to our viewers, stay tuned. We hope to see you more in our next upcoming session next Thursday. Mr. Dharmen, thank you very much. Ms. Lina, thank you very much. Hope you both will have a good day, a good week in this MCO, in the fourth phase of MCO. And we'll see each other when the office opens, okay?
Stay safe, everyone.
All right. Thank you very much, guys. Bye.
Bye.